In this video, I want to talk about clustering datasets with unsupervised learning. Let's take a look. So, we first began by importing some necessary packages for this video. In In28, we first import the scientific computing library NumPy as NP. In the second line, we import the visualization library matplotlib .pyplot, the Python plotting subpackage, as plt, the plotting shorthand. And then after an empty line, we first import from scikit-learn the cluster and datasets submodule. And then within the neighbor submodule, we import the kneighborsgraph function. You'll see later on how this is relevant. And then we want to do some pre-processing on some of the data that we're feeding this clustering algorithm. And so with scikit-learn.preprocessing, we're importing the standard scalar. We again set the seed of our database. And so here we use NumPy to set the random seed to 42. To distinguish the output of our classifier, we want to create an array of colors. So these colors are blue and orange respectively. And here this array has two elements. The first one in hex color coding is hash 377EB8. So this represents in hex notation the RGB color space that this color is in. If you're not familiar with the hex encoding of colors, I suggest you look it up. In In31, we call datasets.makeMoons, and we create 1,337 samples with 0.05 worth of noise. The makeMoons feature, or function, returns a tuple of input-output pairs. We put this as x, comma y, meaning capital X contains our input or feature matrix, otherwise also known as design matrix, and with y contain our output vector. We want to first scale x. In In32, we call the standard scalar constructor to create an object or an instance of the standard scalar, and with this instance, we call the fit transform function on x, which then scales x standardly. The next step is to initialize 3 different clustering algorithms or unsupervised learning algorithms to tackle our clustering problem. So what are the 3 algorithms that we're looking at? Number 1, we're looking at mini-batch k-means. Number 2, spectral clustering. Number 3, ward clustering. Specifically, when we initialize mini-batch k-means within the cluster package, we tell it that we have generated a dataset which has 2 clusters. In spectral clustering, again, we have 2 clusters. We use a specific eigenvalue solver, and the affinity measure that we're picking is nearest neighbors. In the ward clustering algorithm, we have 2 clusters. We pick a ward linkage for this clustering algorithm, and the connectivity is defined using a kneighborsgraph function. The next thing to do is to train each of these algorithms to see how they perform. In In36, I'm calling the fit function of the mini-batch k-means algorithm and feeding in x. Contrary to what we have seen throughout the course, where we call fit xy, we only fit x because this is an unsupervised. There's no example answer, right? So we're not feeding in y, which is the example answer. So we only fit x. The next thing to do is to see what the predictions are from the mini-batch k-means. In In48, I take the labels property of the mini-batch k-means algorithm object and assign it to the variable y predicted. Leveraging PLT, we specify a figure that is 15 cm times 15 cm. We scatter plot the two axes of x onto this plot, and we specify that the colors should be looked up depending on what the labels are. We then call plt.show to show this plot. So this is the plot. This dataset is challenging to cluster because, as you can see, there are two half-moon shaped clustered trying to work with one another, right? So the classifier needs to properly navigate sort of the curved space between the two moons to successfully cluster these two datasets. Now let's look at spectral clustering. We first fit X into the spectral clustering algorithm, and then we want to see how well it performs. In in50, I'm again calling the labels property of the spectral clustering algorithm and assigning these values to Y predicted. Using the same algorithm with PLT as before, we can see that a new graph has been generated. In this new graph, you can see that each half moon has its own color. Contrast this to the previous graph where each half moon has sort of like a different color, and there seems to be straight line decision barrier instead of now where it's perfectly clustered. So that's spectral clustering. In the last bit of this, let's look at ward. Again, we fit X into ward and we look at the labels. We take the labels and we plot it, and again we see the same problem. A large part of the first half moon, the top half moon, is labeled correctly in orange, but the bottom half of this half moon has not been labeled correctly. And that's all there is to it. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to visualize our clusters with Seaborn. I'll see you guys next time.